Hi, everyone. Welcome to the VCI and Bloomberg Beta Future of Work conversation. I am Bahia Yasmin Robinson. So excited to have you guys with us after a long holiday weekend. Hope you guys are safe and healthy during this time and your families are doing well. Obviously, it's very unprecedented and challenging times for many. At the same time, there's a lot kind of going on in the tech startup, small business growth world. And so we thought it was appropriate to pull some experts together in the VC space and have this conversation. So thank you. Let's jump into a little bit of housekeeping and just letting you know how this is gonna go. Okay, there's one. So a couple of things. One is that we're trying to keep this short so that everyone's not zoomed out by the end of the day, keeping it to an hour. And really the purpose of this is to really shed some light. So I had the pleasure of seeing the last Future of Work conversation with Roy and the Bloomberg team. By the way, thank you guys. The whole Bloomberg team has been fantastic. And really what struck me was, you know, I think everyone that's watching this knows there's kind of two different worlds. One is kind of the Silicon Valley world, and there's like the everyone else world. And so, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way. I just mean that in terms of Silicon Valley is the birthplace of the kind of tech and startup ecosystem. And so really wanted to shed some light and expand the conversation on what emerging managers are seeing in the space in different locations, and what folks like Eric Moore, who's been here in Silicon Valley for a long time and through some upturns and downturns, what you've seen or what he's seen in the space. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce Roy, who is joining us from Bloomberg Beta as the head of Bloomberg Beta, and wanted you to introduce yourself and kind of give a little, you know, overview of kind of what you have seen in your experience in the last little while, whatever that means for you.
Thank you, Bahia. Thank you for bringing us all together. Well, I can see from the folks who are already on as attendees that we're going to have great questions. Knowing just some of these folks, I can't wait to hear more. So I'll try not to say too much, just to say, you know, we've been doing the really early investing thing in the future of work since the beginning of our fund. And I see this, like, let's for a moment, while we respect the fact that there's this enormous tragedy in the world and it's befalling people differently, just in this professional context of startups, I think this is a moment where we're going to get to test to see if a lot of our beliefs are actually right or not. And I see a huge difference between a bunch of people whose mentality is, I'm going to use this moment to convince you of what I already believed. You know, all the people who want to like cancel San Francisco are like, see, I told you it's over. Maybe they're right. Maybe they're wrong. They're probably wrong, but we'll see. You know, I just don't know. And the specific kinds of assumptions that I think are worth calling into question, I'll do two about startups and one about investors. One about startups is, you know, we're focused on investing in the Bay Area in New York because that's where we think we can serve companies best. But we've spent a lot of time going around the country with VCs and members of Congress trying to like study how to get startups going in these places. And the tales of those founders often include some like, God, but if only I had it as easy as the people in Silicon Valley who could just drive and go see some venture capitalists. It's like, okay, playing field is now more level. So whatever advantage those people had in San Francisco, if they had one, I'm not suggesting they do, or New York, or pick your ecosystem, then I think there's less of that now. So that's one. A second is about the commitment to the kinds of startups that were fashionable to start in tech. Like you get these fashions that like people all start a certain company and it's in the air for a little while. And now all of our lived experience is changing. So like, go figure, we got a bunch of video chat startups. People's ability to choose things that can work in the short term and thrive in the long term is all, like, that's the other thing. And then emerging managers, I mean, we occasionally put money into other VC funds. We like fund ones because we think that those are founders, basically. And we've believed for a long time, like, the capital doesn't flow fairly to people, that like people who shouldn't have a hard time raising do. And I kind of think this moment's going to test that, because a lot of the like social access that you used to have, like getting invited to some party or something like that, that's all gone. There's certain kind of access that still exists. So those are the things. It's like, is the playing field level between places? Are the fashions going to change in what people want to back? And can we get some new emerging managers more capital because of how capital will flow differently now? There's plenty of bias that is going to continue, but those are the questions on my mind.
Amazing. Well, that's why we're having this conversation, because everyone's in alignment on that. By the way, I guess I did not say what I do in terms of CEO and founder of VCInclude. 2 years ago, I built a ecosystem for a lot of the reasons that Roy just described to support and grow institutional grade emerging managers, from ones that are at Fund 1 to Fund 4, the ones that are at Fund 2s and 3s to 6s and 7s and 8s, and really create this an ecosystem of trust, one, because it is about relationships and it is about some types of pattern matching in terms of actions and responsibility and trust and those things. But it's also about, knowing what you don't know and the learning curve, because there is a large, and long learning curve in terms of building funds to last and making sure that they serve communities that in the past may not have had that type of access. So that's what VCI does. The last thing I'll say is that we are going to, for whatever questions that are not going to be answered, we're going to go to Twitter after this conversation and continue the conversation. So with that, I'd love for the other panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Carmen, Carmen Palafox. So please go.
Hi, everyone. My name is Carmen Palafox, and I'm based in Los Angeles. So today I get to represent the Southern California region, of which I'm a native. We invest at the very early stages of tech you can touch. So that's hardware. We specialize in pre-seed and seed stage. We've invested in B2B, B2C across several different industries, and we have an innovation lab in the San Fernando Valley, the OG Valley, called Toolbox. It's nice to be here.
Eric?
Hi there, I'm Eric Moore. I run a pre-seed fund called Base Ventures. We are based, the office is in Berkeley. I live in Oakland, so right now we're based in Oakland. I'm happy to be here, thank you. And Bahia, before I go any further, I want to thank you for getting me out of the bed in a shirt. I mean, I haven't put on a real shirt in a while, so I appreciate that. It's kind of weird, but I'm glad to be here with the somewhat semi-pressed shirt on. We primarily focus on the consumer market and retail, and we also do some enterprise work as well. And the bulk of our investments are in the Silicon Valley, with some investments in New York and much longer story in Las Vegas as well. So.
And Heather, last but not least.
Yeah, I'm Heather Hartnett. I run a fund called Human Ventures, and we're in New York City. We're an early stage venture firm. We invest in what we call the human needs economy. So future of work and livelihood is a big part of what we feel human needs are. The last 10 years have been really focusing on nice to haves, and the next 10 years are really focusing on the need to have. So we're thrilled that founders are really looking for big, challenging opportunities to be able to fulfill those needs. We do have some investments in LA as well. We have a cohort-based model that's attached to our fund, so we do see categorical founders, the pre-seed stage. Sometimes it's pre-concept all the way to later seed.
So to that point, Heather, I think I'm gonna actually just ping you just right away in terms of, because you are in New York, and that's been a really hard hit, city in terms of COVID-19. And so just from the investor perspective, like, how are you thinking about it? And more importantly, how are you seeing some of your portfolio companies kind of changing the way that, and this is kind of internal, external, like, what are you thinking about how work is being experienced and performed, kind of from the investor, but also from the human, that's a, pun intended, the human layer, like, how is it actually impacting the companies, and how are the companies, either utilizing the moment, but just give us some color of like what you're seeing and how your companies are doing.
definitely. As Roy mentioned, for respect that we know we have this really unique experience that we're all living, and people are experiencing it in very different ways. I'm lucky that I get to work with our industry and founders, because you really see the optimistic side of a shift, a paradigm shift like this, where these opportunities do start to present themselves. And so in the beginning, it was really, take care of the human team. How do we know how to communicate across? We had 100 people in our office, not all human. There were 10 portfolio companies in our office. And so to be able to create communication across all of those was first and foremost the highest priority. And then talking to each founder and understanding where their runway was and where their 6 to 10 months plans are. So that was a big part of COVID. What we have kind of seen, we've always thought about the future of work, especially as it pertains to talent and how people are evaluating talent. Some of the other areas that we're really looking at now is activity-based work, and how people, when they go back into space, how our space is going to be leveraged to be able to really foster community, but might not be the place that you're going to be sitting 9 to 5 and having every single member of your team there. And so, a company of ours, Tiny Organics, they're a baby food company, an organic baby brand. They had, a kitchen in Harlem. They had a co-manufacturer in Maryland. They had their team based here in New York, and they had to figure out how to synchronize all of that in a very efficient way. And when they go back to their work, they'll see how that's going to play out. I think also, obviously, flex work for life balance. How are we bringing in new ways of working that accommodate families and family living? Everybody says and has reminded me that if you feel more productive during this time, you might not have children. And so I think we'll be thinking about that as well.
And Bahia, I can just play off what Roy said in terms of, this geographic advantage of working in a certain location like San Francisco. We've had 3 of our portfolio companies close their round, and I think some of our portfolio companies are actually changing the way we can work in the future. We've been so concentrated in cities that allowing and enabling people to work from different locations, different geographies is the future. So we have a company called Dash Systems, and they commercialize airdrops. When we first made the investment, it sounded a bit far out, but what they do is they enable drops to locations that may not otherwise have access to same-day delivery. So, I know someone in New York that has not left their home in 70 days because they're able to get things delivered to them right away, but someone in Alaska doesn't have that same experience. So this company is facilitating the delivery of goods in a shorter time frame. So that's one example of what the future could look like if we are moving outside of cities.
Yeah, I'll chime in here. I forgive me. I have a background with being a seed investor in Zappos, and as a result of that, I got Amazon shares. So I happen to like Jeff Bezos, and that may be controversial, but he was in an interview. He was asked about, and I guess he oftentimes is asked about what's going to happen and what he thinks about change in the next 10 years. And his response has been, although that's interesting, I am a lot more concerned about, and I think an even better question would be, what's not going to change in the next 10 years? And, from his standpoint, people are going to want fast deliveries. People are going to want, lower prices. And there will never be a time when, likely there will never be a time, certainly not in the next 10 years, where anyone will come to him and say, you know what, I love you, Jeff, but when are the prices going to go higher? Or, when, is it possible for you to make my deliveries a little bit slower? So I look at this kind of the same way. And I posed the question, what in fact is not going to change in the next 10 years. And as I put that lens on it and thinking about some of the companies in my portfolio, I know for a fact that culture is going to matter. In fact, there might even be an argument to be made that, in this new world, culture will, matter even more. So there's a company that we invested in pre-seed called Culture IQ that deals with that, and they make measuring culture kind of a part of their workflow. And they've done very well to date, and they've continued to perform in this market. And a second idea is, we're not going to stop banking, and a lot of the money center banks, and actually most banks care mostly about W-2 employees. So what about those who are 1099s, the gig economy folks? Oxygen is another company we invested in pre-seed that is addressing that. So they were built with that in mind, just the 1099 employee, and they kind of know 1099 earners, and they know kind of what those their habits and anticipating their inconsistent income, and as a result of that, they still bank them. I think they've grown by 20,000 accounts in the last 4 months, so they've done well. And the last one, I can talk about it later, but it's about essentially it's called a company called Pad Split, and they deal with they like to call it housing as a service, and I'll talk about it later. But I like to think about it from the standpoint of what do we know for a fact is going to be happening, going to be consistent in the next 10 years versus what may be.
So you're saying housing, delivery of things, right? And then like the way that we actually perform the work, i.e. how do we get paid, and how does that, it's all kind of happening now, right? We're experiencing it from the government, perspective, but also, at the company level. I don't know if anyone else is dying to ask this question, but before we go to Roy, how do you measure culture? How does that?
Yeah. It's interesting, right? Their approach
in 30 seconds.
Their approach is that they perform and they allow companies to, just the same way that you do 360-degree feedback loops. Okay. They do that same thing. They have very pointed questions, and then in the background, the company goes in and says, "Hey, these people are talking about this. This is speaking to your culture or lack of culture, or what the company employees are looking for from a culture standpoint." And then from that, they actually engage with the company and they help them develop and work on their culture issues. So
got it. Okay. Now I get it. Okay. Thank you. Roy?
I don't even know where to start on this one. So I just say, I look at it a couple ways. One is for the companies in which we are already investors and the types of companies in which we invest already we're used to investing. I think it's been like with lots of folks, like some things are up, some things are down. It's sort of like we had all these marbles on one of the like marble maze boards, and it just got shifted. And like, is that good? Did it fall in the hole? Did it get safe? It's random. And we have companies, that we've invested in, like Flexport, that does international shipping broking. So they're clearly tied to the macro economy. Companies like Open Collective that help you create a project and run money through it without needing to set up a corporation, that now all the people who have some nonprofit thing they want to do can use it for some COVID response, and everything in between. And one of the reasons I was curious to hear Eric's perspective is I think I've noticed that the founders who lived through past crises are reacting in general quite differently. Like there's a skill to crisis response, and it's not a skill you get to practice very often. And so that's been interesting. Then the other thing in terms of just areas to think about, and I don't know, we can shut me up if this is not interesting, we don't have to go there. But if I think about like what didn't exist before that is now needed more than ever, well, I've been on this train for a long time about we need more startups that serve old people. Like it is the number one prediction that I feel completely confident making is the workforce is gonna be a lot older. It has been a lot older, it's gonna keep getting older. But the other one that's not new, because it's been there, but maybe more pronounced, is we have tens of millions of people who can't get paid enough to live. And we've had a tremendous, I think inequality is a hard word because people tend to focus on the difference between rich and poor. And what I more mean when I think about it is we've had too many people who can't participate fairly in our economic system. And that is both a tragedy from a justice perspective and a huge business opportunity. You figure out a way to start getting those people paid. And, you know, for all the calls we've all gotten from friends are like, what do I do now? That what do I do now is a massive problem. And I have yet to see, there are good answers around the edges for sure. I mean, you know, we've got a company that we invested in, it's just small, which is why it's around the edges now, which is called Ask Wonder. Ask Wonder is the website. And it's an online research service where you can go and ask a question. They'll farm it out to a network of smart people who could be wherever, you know, working and finding the answers. But that's not yet an answer for tens of millions of people. And that's the scale at which I feel like, you know, might as well be a startup because it might need to be government, but shit, we all have to try to solve this one or things are not going to hold together much longer.
Does anybody else have any portfolio companies that have some kind of solution around, you know, tens, not hundreds of millions of people in between the wealth gap, right? Like in the actual gap, and like any solutions that are directly addressing that, or just curious? If not, we can move on.
Yeah, well, the company that I mentioned, PadSplit, they are focusing on kind of the lower end of the economic spectrum, and they're based in Atlanta, and they look at it not just from the standpoint of housing costs, but also transportation costs. So, and then when you combine those two, for instance, in Atlanta, they fare the worst in the entire country, and from an affordability standpoint. So they make it, you know, they allow people to rent a room in a home. It's much more involved in that, but at a much lower price. And what happens is that because of I think about 49% turnover per year for hourly workers, they provide housing, like I mentioned, as a service, and it helps to empower the workers. So when they change jobs, they don't have to transfer utilities or Wi-Fi or deal with furniture, and they provide, you know, telemedicine needs for employees who don't have that from their employers. So they really are focused on that, and have done a fantastic job working on it.
But yeah, I'll say one thing. You know, we invest in Tech You Can Touch, which involves manufacturing, and the US is competitive in manufacturing, but that's because of automation. And so when I think about the future of work, I do think about higher paid jobs, you know, not necessarily lower paid jobs. What I've seen during this period is companies that have said, you know, I'm going to pay a living wage. And that just doesn't work in this moment right now. And so I think that's
a living wage is not a living wage, right? I mean, that's not
right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. When you dig in and you figure out what a living wage is, and you put yourself in the position of, could I live on this? You know, in most cases, you probably can't.
We haven't invested in any yet, but you know, education and work have always been closely linked, and I think we'll start to see a lot more education come through the workplace and helping, you know, kind of guide a career track in a different trajectory. And I'm looking forward to seeing where those platforms can substitute some of the traditional education platforms, or people taking more time after high school to figure out what skills and attributes they have. Career assessment beyond the resume, but really developing skills.
Is that a have you guys gotten any insights from your portfolio companies around, you know, this whole, and you touched on it a lot, Roy, in the last future of work conversation of this, like upskilling, like retooling, upskilling, kind of this educational component that's not just about ed tech, but it's also about kind of different type of education or tools for the portfolio companies. Is that something that is coming out yet as a need within the portfolio companies that you guys are investing in? Or do you just kind of see it intuitively? Or is it something that our founders come in to you and say, hey, you know, this blindsided us. We need to either educate or re-educate our team, or we need to educate the user, right, to deal with our, platform or product in a different way?
Yeah. I mean, I'll share what I've seen on that is founders are clearly learning about different things than they'd learned before. They're using tools to arm themselves. Clearly, consumers and users are doing it too. I mean, Masterclass is like launching classes all the time and ... I think that the weird thing, of course, with startups is over-preparing for something is also a sin. So like, I'm just now doing the thought experiment of if 6 months ago, some founder had said to me, well, our number one priority right now is pandemic preparation. We're figuring out what's going to happen. To be like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, don't do that. Like, that might not happen. And so I think part of the trade craft of starting companies is figuring it out as you go. The tooling has to be there. And some of it is going to serve people who are mastering new tools. Like our whole team just did a no-code, low-code training as a team to try to learn some of the tools that are available just for automating our own work. Because like, what is VC? We're like a small customer success team or something selling money. And then there's some that are more technical. I mean, we invested in Weights and Biases, which is a set of a platform of services that you can use to manage models and for AI purposes. And so it's yeah, the short answer is yes. It's hard to say anything other than like the graphic equalizer is just going to have lots of little settings of like exactly what kind of learning here and what kind there. Obviously, we're not going to do the like 1,000 person in a stadium rousing sales speech in quite the same way.
And you may have been referencing this, Bahia, but I see it, or I've seen it in the larger companies. So Amazon and they're spending $700 million, and I think Walmart is spending $2 billion, and JP Morgan Chase is doing $250 million to help their employees upskill internally, right? So they're teaching them how to do some low-level coding or just some more technical issues so that they can keep them gainfully employed, I guess is the thought. But I see that more on a larger level. I've not seen it yet trickle down to my portfolio companies yet, but I imagine, this is, like you said, 60, 75 days in, and people are thinking about, I think they've gotten over the surviving part, and they're figuring out thinking about how to, thrive in this market. But I have not yet seen that happen here. I've seen it on a larger level.
Just to your point, Eric, on Walmart, I know even before the pandemic, they had one of the largest online university courses or classes, right? Because their workforce is so massive, offering that to their employees at a substantially discounted $1 a day or something it was. I think it's really interesting to think about your employer being your educator for more ways than just learning on the job.
So what are the other needs? Like, so what are you seeing? It's like, other than funding, right? So there's that piece. And I mean, you can speak to that a little bit deeper if there's some nuance to that outside of what, we all have seen, the general news. But what are needs and insights coming from, from the portfolio that you're like, wow, okay, we need to upskill, like, how do we solve it? What are some of the challenges in terms of the needs and insights for you?
A lot of it was around PPP for a while, of course. And I think what that revealed, both for tech companies and for the service providers to tech, is how inexpert we are as an industry at working with other like parts of the world. Like government programs happen, not under these conditions, but like ambiguously worded government programs. That's like a fact of life in other industries. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but it's a fact of life in some other industries, and they know how to deal with it. But here it was like people's heads exploding. They'd never thought about it before. And, we didn't have the answer, because part of the whole thing in these situations is there's not a right answer. But we did have an ability to help them think it through, know who to ask, who not to ask, help say things like, just because your VC tells you not to do it doesn't mean it's in your interest not to do it. Ask yourself whether it's in their interest not to do it. And we had a horrible situation. I'm not going to name a name, but because it's not my story to share with specifics, we had a horrible situation of a VC at a very respected fund coaching on the turn of a dime all the founders not to apply for PPP, only to learn that they played some advisory role in the program. It's like, oh, maybe they were worried about getting called in front of Congress, So it's taken a lot of tradecraft to figure out how to apply to these different situations. And one thing I just want to say on that is tying back to this principle of it should test the theory about Silicon Valley being a better place. Arguably, if you're a founder who is from some other city or from an underrepresented background, you already had to fight through a bunch of shit. And so this is, in a way, your life may be less different today than compared to 3 months ago, compared to like if I was some YC founder who thought I was just going to show up and talk which Stanford frat I went to with other investors and pull a check. Harder to do that now. So that, I think that that's going to be really interesting to see how and if that flattens out, and I hope it will.
Along those lines, I think we've been hearing people needed to think about unit economics, think about, founders they're kind of seeing that rhetoric play out, but then this really showed, growth at all costs was something that was happening, but now you really do have to have some sort of reserve, which by nature, the, VC industry has not wanted. It says, okay, you're not spending efficiently if you have that much cash in the bank. But I think now founders who've gone through this have really seen what it means to tighten the budget, to understand what value is being created for what dollars being spent.
Go ahead.
Bahia, you asked what do founders need? From what I'm seeing, they need community and they need to share stories with each other. We have founders that in our portfolio that are considered essential business. And so, what does that look like when you have to build something and people have to come into work, but they don't necessarily feel safe doing that? So they have to build these leadership skills, sharpen empathy, think about culture and how they're going to manage their biggest assets, which are their people. So that's been an interesting insight for me to see how big a role leadership, empathy, and culture plays into their future.
Do you think it's a shift from product to people? Is that the thing?
I think it's just a new twist, because all of a sudden you're having to, not only, think about business as usual, but how am I going to support my team that now has different needs? Heather alluded to the fact that children come into play. And so a lot of people have had to restructure their work day, and it's become more difficult to be as productive, while other people have just increased productivity.
The most exciting thing I've seen is that, this is a once a century kind of situation that's happened. And if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, in the very beginning, people were concerned about who they were going to either furlough or let go of, and how they were going to, if they were going to survive or not. And so once the bulk of them got past that, now the more edgier, the companies that I think are more, I don't know, it's not fair to say competitive, but I think the ones that I think are thinking about this in the best light, they are thinking about what they can do off the charts, out of the box, to make their company that much bigger, that much better, and to try things that they wouldn't have otherwise tried when things were normal. And so taking advantage of, what do they say, never let a good crisis go to waste or whatever. People, I've seen a couple of companies taking advantage of that mindset, at least.
Yeah, we have a company called Passpot that sells into restaurant chains. And you would think that that would be one of the companies that would be facing severe challenges right now, but just last week they closed a round. And I think it was because of the leadership just being so nimble and be able to refocus. They're in an exciting space that I think will take off, and that's hygiene, sanitation, so helping restaurants play and be compliant with the FDA code. But they did look for those pockets of opportunity to say, we're going to be in the leader in hand washing, and developed a big campaign around that. They were very in tune with who their customers were and what stage they were at and what their focus was.
Yeah, it just occurs to me listening, that there's a big difference in these responses between, this is going to be obvious, but I'll make more specific, but companies depending on what stage they're at. And in the pre-product market fit stage, or the arguably not quite full product market fit stage, you have this endless search for figuring out what's going to lock, and maybe they can come up with something that works well enough in the short term that it keeps them in business. It makes me think, I wonder in the history of business, whether like, were there any companies born in the 1918 flu that like had some temporary service and ended up lasting? I don't know. It's like question for lazy web, I guess. But then post product market fit, and especially in the growth stage, you do have much more of this like wartime CEO kind of mentality, for better or for worse. And one of our partners at Bloomberg Beta, Karen Klein, led SoftBank's fund during the 2001 collapse. And so like, it was eerily similar to now in a lot of ways. You got this big money, anyway. And she just talks about how oftentimes, yeah, like there's the stuff that's pretty clear, like extending runway and living in an environment of scarcity, but the tempo that she talks about for the very best leaders, speeding up how fast they respond to stuff, that to me is one of the things that a lot of people have been asking about, is sort of like, how do I get a beat on the culture of my company's tempo and speeding it up, especially when I can't see everybody. This is really different because like, could be going fast, could be going slow. All our usual radar for picking that up, you know, now get compressed into this tiny little window. So those are, I think, some of the puzzles right now.
I am interested, you know, activity-based work, I think, has worked in Europe and other countries for a long time. And I think now we're going to start to see probably some thought leaders in that, how you're structuring your OKRs, how you're structuring internally your output versus having people in the office where so much of productivity felt like it was happening, but might not have been. I think it'll be interesting to see that as well.
So, oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I agree with Ron in terms of stage. A lot of our companies are, you know, pre-seed, seed stage. So some of them are in this tech development stage. And, you know, as you go from pre-seed and seed stage, there's always this balance between tech development and go to market. And some companies, you know, just, you know, push really hard on go to market, and their ability to scale may not be there. So what I've seen with some of our portfolio companies that have really pushed far on go to market is that during this time period, they've recognized that, you know what, there's going to be a 4-month delay. So what can I do to be prepared once we start, our customers start coming back, to be able to address that demand? And so I think that's been one of the things that I've seen as an area of an opportunity, to really focus in on having that ability to scale as soon as things come back online.
Eric?
No,
Okay.
I said my piece. Thanks.
Okay. I'm thinking about, this is a kind of a little bit of a bonus, but you know, from the funding perspective, touching on, are you guys thinking in the next, let's just say, I know that there's actually a lot of companies that are still closing their rounds. Are you guys looking at companies in the next 3 months that you're planning on investing in? And if so, were you looking at them prior to COVID-19, or are these just trying to get a gauge on, you know, of course there's entrepreneurs, you know, on this call, and even some other VCs that might be looking at deals. And so are there any kind of exciting folks that have, I mean, obviously don't say any names because you haven't invested in them, but, you know, that popped up on your radar? Or if you're making investments, are you only doing that with companies that you've already established a relationship with?
No, I mean, April was, for us, we were shocked to look at the numbers, 50% faster in terms of investment pace, dollars invested, new dollars invested, than our typical month. And, you know, I'm not going to say, oh, that's because something COVID related. It might have been chance, but we're definitely still active. And it feels fairly similar. I mean, we run a really trust-based model, as I think all of us early investors do. Like, it's so easy. I remember with my startup, we raised $8.5 million on Kickstarter. And one of my friends emailed me. He's like, why don't you just go to Bali now and just call it a day? And I mean, it just reminded me how much we all rely on trust. And it's been surprising to me. I can't speak from a founder's perspective, but I can say from this investor's perspective, I feel absolute confidence in the ability to continue to make investments, get to know startups. I will take a look at who we've gotten to know, like where we've funded them over the course of just these, however long you said it was, 75 days. I can't tell if it's been 7.5 days or 750 days. Yeah, that's what it feels like.
We do a cohort-based model at Human Ventures.
Oh.
Can you hear me? Sorry. So it's actually, you know, we're built for this. We're built for really, really early stages, and you want to get to know the founders and those relationships based off of their attributes. They don't even have an idea sometimes yet, so you're getting to know them. So we have a 100-day business design process in our cohorts where we go deep with the founders, and this is the first time we've launched it virtually. And I'll say with the over communication and all of the programming and everything, we've really got to know them, and we expect to make a few investments out of this cohort, you know, and really lean in on some of them. And we haven't met them right in person. That'll be really interesting. We also, you know, have seen new deals too. We haven't made an outside investment yet since COVID hit, but hopefully we will be soon.
And are you looking outside of New York now? I mean, again, you know, now we're virtual. So now this whole kind of Silicon Valley, to Roy's earlier point, are you seeing that your kind of splay of new companies are a little bit more outside of the kind of, you know, normal parameters in terms of regional?
Yeah, I mean, when we would build with founders early, we like to have them in the space, so New York was important. I think right now, more than ever, it's why is the company in the area that you're in and the talent that's around it. So there's more of a founder market fit, both, you know, geographically, but also in the market itself. And so I think we're going to see that democratized quite a bit, and founders just saying, this is where we are for X, Y, and Z reasons.
You're leading into my inclusion question, what I'm trying to kind of end with, but I'm trying to hold off. Eric, you still look like you wanna.
No, I'm not very much different to say from the other two panelists, and that is things haven't changed. You know, we're still investing, still looking at investments. I think there is maybe a bit more of an emphasis on the trust factor and where the deal came from. Versus just coming across the transom, which we didn't do much before, but it's really out of the question at this point. You know, we don't know you or know folks around you, probably wouldn't consider it. But we are still putting money into work, and I think the narrative around the Valley is, or generally around startups, is that valuations have been considerably depressed, and I think they're fair. I think they might be lower than they were pre-COVID, but I don't think they're so low that, you know, it's an opportunity to really take advantage of the market and get really extremely depressed valuations. So.
But here I'll say we, you know, I just led a investment into a company called Noria Water Technologies, and I thought perhaps they'd be challenged with closing their round, and did not experience that at all. And I think it's because of the fact that they're enabling remote monitoring. So I have more conviction on what they're doing now as a result of this because of what they're enabling. And I, as an investor, now have a bit more time to really sit down and focus on the inbound. So I'm looking not just, you know, at the warm intros, but also at everything that comes through our website.
So question about, you know, obviously the inclusion piece is, and I'll continue to kind of ask a direct question, but if you can choose either or both, do you feel like there's, because you talked about this water company, and I thought about, of course, ESG and impact, and kind of my mind went into that kind of sphere. And I'm wondering, do you think that your portfolios will be more impactful and or inclusive And when I say impact, I mean, social benefit. If there's a water company that's doing something that's making a system better, then is that a positive impact? And when I say impact, I mean, a positive net impact. I know that's a controversial topic, but you can pass on it. You don't have to answer. But I'm wondering if you're seeing or feeling like there's a moment here. I know you've already said the inclusion piece might be a moment, but what about the impact side?
Yeah, I'm seeing, we don't have a mandate to, or haven't just fully adopted the impact investor label, but after 22 investments, I can say that we've invested in companies that do have a positive impact on the environment. And so I think that trend will continue. I'm seeing a kind of a convergence across companies that say we're not only food and ag tech, but we're also now climate tech. And, they kind of bridge all of these different impact buckets, which is exciting. But, it's not a core focus of who we are. But I do see more opportunity in that space and more investors.
Yeah, I have maybe what might be an unpopular view on this, which is I think generally speaking, impact investing and impact startups are kind of nonsense. And I say that, having an LP where the profits go to fighting climate change and guns and education. And the reason I say that is because I think that if you want to, the hard thing is just being successful won't be obviously having a good impact, but impact to me is not like an industry or a type of startup or a type of product. It's a way of doing business. And I think that way of doing business for sure has its moment for reasons that it's good. It can be good business. Founders are changing in what they care about. They're less callous, I find, than they used to be, all that kind of stuff. But, the question I often pose to people is like, would you rather have this impact startup be successful, or would you rather change Amazon by 1%? Probably I'd rather change Amazon by 1%. So I look at stuff like the Amazon workers who organize to influence their company on climate change as some of the most significant examples of impact work, as opposed to impact startups and impact investments. You can have an insurance company that is noble, and you can have an education company that's exploitative. Now, I'm setting aside like guns and like obvious bad stuff, but I think it's more complicated than just the label of impact. I think it's a method, not an industry.
That's why I asked, is to have a little bit of a healthy debate, or at least, that's the problem with impact, is to your point, it's this thing that a lot of people say, especially, institutional investors, we don't know what that means. And so,
maybe they're right. Maybe there's one thing that they're right about. I mean, I feel bad for you guys like raising from a bunch of LPs, but they might be right. Anyway, sorry.
Well, no, I mean, and not to put the 30,000, foot view of what I've seen, but I think where, and we see this in the headlines, over the last several weeks, is I think that institutional investors are really lobbing on to ESG, right? Because there's a measurement, like it's a lens, sustainability and ESG lens. I mean, I'll stop there, because that can go into a whole nother conversation. Maybe we'll do a part 2, but from the startup perspective, I was just wondering if, there feels like there's a push for more inclusive business and/or, some social benefit or outcome that is buried into the value proposition.
Can I speak to this? I used to be in impact investing, the traditional impact investing field. When we started Human, we made the conscious decision not to have it be called impact. We really wanted to focus on the good humans who were building, to Roy's point, building businesses that were being built in a correct way, also solving big challenges. So I think you can leapfrog the terminology of impact, and it's really not an altruism viewpoint. It's where are the biggest opportunities, and that's where we say the needs economy. You really have to say that it's not a gratuitous business. It's fulfilling a need if it's actually working in a sustainable way, and then you have conscious people who are thinking about culture, and you're thinking about how you're scaling in a very mindful way. And I think I think the big thing comes down to talent. Are you resonating with your mission, and are you, gathering troops behind some sort of a mission that people can really stand behind? And that is a big lever point for founders to be able to attract talent away from the big giants who have a lot of capital to spend.
And just really quickly to that end, like where do you see the opportunity, and where can be most impactful? And we invested in a company called MOS, M-O-S, that is dealing with a big topic now, which is student debt, and they're the kind of a TurboTax for financial aid. And Garrett Camp led their seed round, which we were in, and Sequoia just led their Series A. So they are, as much as, it wasn't an investment from an impact standpoint, it was an investment that, that looked at and dealt with a really big and important issue today. And the founders, again, they didn't start the company because they essentially couldn't get money in college, many years ago. So it was kind of in her, it was a pain point for her, but it wasn't necessarily an impact investment. And I don't think that Sequoia, they didn't invest out of their impact fund, which I don't think exists.
So I'm pulling a little bit from some of the Q&A questions, and I thought this was a good one. Basically, what are you talking about in your, in your teams, in terms of your fund, or in terms of with your portfolio companies that no one is really talking about? Is there, a theme, a topic, a strategy that is not something you want to share, that you feel like, why isn't anybody talking about this particular thing? If there's, what could that be, or what would that be? That's one of the questions from the Q&A.
Roy, did you want to say something?
I was just thinking actually I was feeling grateful for the fact that right now there were lots of things we weren't talking about before that now feel like there's created a ability for them to enter into the conversation nationally and or within our industry. So I was struggling to think of things that aren't in there. I mean, I do think this whole thing that's happened on Twitter of the tech people who go after journalists and kind of debating over cancel culture. It's like, you realize saying cancel culture is its own form of cancel, blah, 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 blah. And it all gets very meta and confusing. And so I guess I wish the thing we were talking about more was the green shoots of practical new ideas that are actually starting to work and blowing those up. And I'm not seeing as much of that. But in general, actually, I think I've been astonished by how well tech and startups in particular, new VC funds in particular, have changed their mentality in this moment. It's like so much learning happening and so much sharing with each other and not backbiting, but trying to help each other. I mean, I think our industry's response has been so much better than I would have guessed. So that's why I'm struggling to answer your question. Sorry, Heather. Long answer, long non-answer.
No, I love that. I mean, one area to feed off that, one area that we really don't talk about a lot, but have been putting a lot of time and energy is beyond the resume tracking, right? So personality tracking, attributes that you can't get from a degree, all of these different intangible skill sets. And we've been mapping these across our founders for 5 years now. And I think that a new, redefining pattern recognition, a big shift like this is a big moment to be able to do that, because who had resilience in this time? Hopefully those are pattern recognition attributes that will be carried on for funding going forward. So founders are earning their stripes right now that is different than XYZ exit or how many rounds of financing from SoftBank you had. It really, I think, shows some of the grit and the other attributes that are coming out. And then it gives more opportunity for different types of founders to be starting these companies.
Okay, Eric, no?
No.
Question, are you, I don't know if you can really answer this, but if you can, it'd be amazing. Are you educating any of your high net worth LPs on kind of trends, or are they are LPs specific, not just institutional, because that goes slower, but the folks that are putting their own money in, are they coming to you and asking like, what's going on, or this is what we're seeing, or now we want to, kind of think about, the strategy that we're taking and investing in funds like yours, how can we shift this? How can we do this better? Any aha moments that you're able to share?
I don't have any aha moments, but it certainly is true that they are asking us, how things are going and taking our temperature and wanting to find out kind of what the portfolio looks like and how it's performing. And I think it's the only difference here is that it's them reaching out versus us reaching out. So historically we we correspond with our LPs on a regular basis, but this is kind of in between correspondences, and they've reached out and asked us very specific and pointed questions around portfolio, and if whether or not any, construction needs to change, or whether or not thinking about life differently now. So there are interested LPs, and as a result, they are asking those questions. But I don't know if it's any, I think it's just I think it's them being smart and concerned and interested. But I don't know if there's any like bigger picture aha moment around it.
But here, are you asking because we're diverse managers? Is that the nature
Partly.
of the question? Okay.
Partly,
yeah,
but
I think in terms of that, I think the messaging is let's not backslide. Let's make sure that we're making forward progress and continuing momentum and seeing more money and more capital going to women founders, funders, diverse funders. So thinking through different financing options, how can regulation or policy support more?
I mean, I'm asking it because it's layered, right? So I'm curious as to, some of these questions you probably can't answer, which is, from an LP's perspective, are they going to every fund in their portfolio? Or are they like, let us, out to the smaller managers and get the temperature check on the ground, both in terms of their investment and maybe some repercussions. And so part of it is, obviously, sophisticated investors want to, protect or at least know that they're making a good investment. But then there's all the, potential unconscious bias, or even just straight up, like, what are you guys doing? And how are you, let's let's kick the tires on this and see like what the fund's doing. The panel has this Bloomberg data as the larger fund, and then a fund 1, fund 2, and fund 3. And so, wanted to get a temperature kind of holistically of how you guys are communicating with LPs, or how they're communicating with you.
Well, I'll tell you what we're getting, because we're LPs in a handful of funds. It's been amazing seeing how this moment reveals the personality of any founder, including the founder of a fund. And I just say, in general, the ones who are communicating more frequently seem to be doing better. Like if you're just like, yeah, we'll just wait for a regular quarterly update and here's your COVID update. It's like, well, this seems unusual. Are you not treating this like an unusual moment? And then you also have these things where certain ideas just float around. So the first person was like, some companies are affected positively, some are negatively. I was like, okay, that's interesting. Let's get curious. The 9th person who said that, I was like, okay, this is like, you need to think a little bit about how it reads. So I think we're just seeing the differences express. I also think that, this is another insight from my partner, Karen, who talked about in the SoftBank era, what a lot of investors did, and I see LPs doing this a lot, is that thing where, what's the line? You can't grow the pig by weighing it every day. They'll be like, give me an update, give me an update, give me an update. And of course the VCs are stressed because they don't have an update on what's going on with that startup. The startup is stressed because they don't know what's going on in the world any better than anybody else does. So everybody in the eagerness for information is kind of like weighing down the system with all these little questions. And the folks who can confidently avoid that, whether as LPs or VCs, and hang back and let professionals be professional and communicate, that seems to me like a much better strategy. It's why we, as a matter of pride, will never write a startup with like, hey, what's the latest? You know, because like that's just a tax on them. We hope they tell us, but without us asking. But we're not going to bother them with it if we could avoid it.
I think we covered a lot. Any last, we're at the end, and I wanted to thank you guys so much for a very rapid conversation about kind of what's happening, you know, coast to coast, kind of on the ground, all the way through the kind of supply chain of investments and capital, et cetera. And we hope that you guys have enjoyed the conversation. We'll continue to ask some questions of all the panelists and join us with the hashtag VCInclude for you know, continued conversation. Roy, did you have any other last thoughts? Or
no, I mean, I love learning from hearing the perspectives of each of you, and I'm grateful for the conversation. I feel very much like the human in me is in tragedy mode, and the student in me right now is just riveted. And so conversations like this one help me figure out what's going on, because I don't know.
No one knows, really. So with that,
Truth.
you guys,
Thank you for bringing us together.
My pleasure. Be safe, be well, be happy as much as possible, and please reach out to all of us and continue the conversation.
Yeah. Thanks to the participants too.
Thank
all right.
you all.
Cool.
Okay.
Bye for that.
Bye. Bye, Heather. Bye, Carmen.
Heather.